After working overtime at my job once again, I was looking for a way to relieve my stress. That's when I stumbled upon a small restaurant on the edge of the street. Despite passing this route every single day, I'd never seen it before. I guess I had never thought to look beyond where I needed to go. The large bold letters at the top of the building read, "At your service." I paused to think about it again. Yet I'd never heard of that restaurant name ever before. Through the spotless windows, I caught a glimpse inside. It was almost like a little cafe, with an overall homey feel. It was mesmerizing, to say the least. How could I have never noticed this place before? I took a step into the restaurant, catching the scent of delicious food from everywhere. While I stood there waiting, a man had suddenly ushered me to a table for two. Before I knew it, there was a menu in my hands. As my eyes brushed over the fancy-sounding dish names, I slowly realized something. All the meals here were composed of various types of meat. I tried to pick out the most appetizing main course, and somehow, it landed me to bloody lamb. As I waited for someone to take my order, a man suddenly took the seat in front of me. I looked around to see if he had sat at the wrong table, but all the other ones were either completely empty or full. There was no in between. At first, I questioned why he sat with me, but he just smiled and said I looked like I could use some company. I shook my head and told him I was only here to get to go, since I needed to head somewhere else after this. The man insisted that he wouldn't take up much of my time, but after ordering, we ended up chatting for hours about everything. I'd never shared that much about myself with a complete stranger before. Of course, as the restaurant closed, we were both forced to leave. However, as I made my way out, I never heard the door open again. Looking back, I realized he had never left the restaurant. That night, I had brought my leftover box to the hospital. Whenever I got to make my weekly trip to visit my little sister, Lily, it made all my hardships worth it in the end. After she developed her illness, my paychecks primarily went to her medical bills. I don't regret anything. I just wish she could enjoy life, just even a little bit more. I recall talking about her to that strange man at the restaurant. That was the first time I'd ever spoken of her to someone else. Lily loved the food and asked me to bring some more tomorrow. I smiled and stayed with her until she fell asleep. After my next day at work, I decided to stop by at your service once again. This time, the man from before was there. However, his casual clothes were replaced by a chef's outfit instead. Today, he had an unreadable expression on his face. It reminded me of myself a little. The look of an empty hole in your chest that can never be filled. Yet whenever he saw me standing in the doorway, his face had completely transformed into a smile. He told me that yesterday was his day off, which is why he was able to keep me company. Now that he was on duty, he was prepared to make my meal today even better than before. I wasn't able to return the same enthusiasm to him. Thinking of my little sister alone in her hospital room as I stood in this restaurant made me feel guilty. The chef took notice of this, and I talked about how I was working overtime to pay for her medical bills. His face had a look of sympathy, but I could tell what he was really feeling. Pity. He looked at me as if I was a pig waiting to be slaughtered. I turned around and left the restaurant. However, something made me stop in my tracks. In between the restaurant and the neighboring building, a man was passed out drunk in the alleyway. I slowly began to approach him. He reeked of alcohol, with a slight touch of lemon cologne trying to mask his smell. He kept mumbling to himself about running. I tried to help him up, but his body felt so cold. Once the man stopped mumbling, the alleyway was completely silent. I checked his pulse and realized he wasn't breathing, so I fished my phone out of my pocket to call for help. Then the back door to the restaurant began to creak open. I could feel eyes on me as the gap became larger and larger. My heart raced to the thought of being seen with a corpse. Before I could see who was coming out, I instinctively ran away. Afterwards, I found myself at the hospital once again. I tried to forget what I had seen. It had nothing to do with it, and I had way too many things on my plate to worry about that man. Once I walked into my younger sister's room. She almost looked disappointed when I came without a to-go box from At Your Service. I promised to make it up to her, so I decided to go there again tomorrow, despite what I had witnessed. To my surprise, At Your Service was still open the following day. When I arrived, the chef appeared to be waiting for me, lurking around the front of the counter. He apologized for offending me the day before, and so did I for overreacting. I decided to not ask him about the man in the alleyway. The chef offered to serve me something off of the special menu. Apparently, it was a secret for regular customers, but he really wanted me to try some. I took him up on his offer, and he came back with a rare type of meat. It tasted a little bit like pork, with a mixture of something I couldn't quite put my finger on. However, it smelled so oddly familiar. There were hints of alcohol mixed within the meat, and a touch of lemon. The chef looked satisfied seeing me eat like a pig, and told me to come again tomorrow. He claimed to have a meal that would solve all of my worries. From his expression, I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. The next day, I took a detour to our flower shop in order to grab some flowers for my little sister. I got lilies to match with her name. The air felt so fresh that day. I couldn't wait to see her. Once again, I stopped by At Your Service to grab the meal that would supposedly solve all my worries. The chef greeted me as soon as I walked in, then went into the kitchen to prepare my dish. As I sat at the table, I noticed that the roots of the flowers were beginning to rot. How could it start to wither so quickly? When he was finished, the chef came by to personally serve me. It tasted amazing, and the flavors blended together perfectly. I asked him what the special ingredient was, and he just smiled.
I want to call it Lily.
I almost found it touching, before I realized that I had never told him my sister's name. As I continued to crush the meat in between my teeth, the flesh started to taste disgusting to me. Lily, I repeated to myself. Then, I got a call from the hospital. Without letting it ring more than twice, I picked it up. Hello, ma'am. We were just calling to say that a man checked Lily out of her room, and they still haven't returned. Can we get an estimate of when they'll be back? I felt like throwing up when I realized what had happened. This wasn't just a normal restaurant. This was a slaughterhouse. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I actually don't know much about acts of service, but I really like the pun of doing At Your Service as the restaurant name. That's really what inspired this story. So goodbye for now, but not forever.